Hello everyone. Today we are starting with History chapter 11, that is the Nationalist Movement Part 2, 1919 to 1947. In this we'll talk about the arrival of the Mahatma Gandhi and all the actions and movement that he has been carried out during these years. So let's start with the topics. Towards the end of the First World War, the Indian national movement found a new leader, that is Mohandas Karamchand Gandhiji. Under his leadership, the national movement became a mass movement and people from all walks of life participated in it. Due to his enormous influence on the people, Rabindranath Tagore called him Mahatma. Now let's talk about the early life of Mahatma Gandhiji. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was born on 2nd October 1869 at Porbandar in Gujarat. His father was a Diwan of Porbandar. Diwan means financial administrator. Mohandas left for England in 1888 to study law. After completing his studies, he went to Natal in South Africa to work in a law firm. It was here that his political ideologies gained a definite shape. In South Africa, Gandhiji, like many other Indians and Africans, faced several racial discrimination. He was thrown off a train as he refused to move from the first class to a third class coach while holding a valid first class ticket. These events inspired him to fight against injustice and discrimination that was prevailing at South Africa. Likewise, Gandhiji founded the Natal Indian Congress in 1894, which organized the Indian community of South Africa into a homogeneous political force and helped Indians voicing their aggressions against British discrimination. He developed a novel method of mass agitation called Satyagraha. Gandhiji's policy of non-violent resistance is known as Satyagraha. The essence of his Satyagraha was to oppose the wrong without hurting the oppressor. Even while resisting evil, he would express compassion for evildoer. To him, a true Satyagrahi would not show any signs of hatred and must undergo necessary training to have the discipline to perform Satyagraha. As Gandhiji emerged as a leader of the Indian freedom struggle, Satyagraha became synonymous with the freedom movement. Now let's talk about the Champaran Satyagraha or the Champaran movement. With the return of Gandhiji to India in 1915, a new phase in the Indian national movement began. In 1917, farmers in Champaran were facing the tyranny of indigo planters. Gandhiji went to Champaran, defied British orders and refused to leave till the British were forced to withdraw the excessive tax imposed on the farmers. In 1918, Gandhiji led the protesting textile workers of Ahmedabad who demanded a raise in wages. And there was another movement that led by Mahatma Gandhiji at Kheda in Gujarat. Now let's talk about that. In Kheda, Gujarat, he supported the farmers who were demanding a suspension of revenue tax. That means reducing the tax rate. He soon became a mass leader with a large following. Likewise, Mahatma Gandhiji became popular and people started following him. Now let's talk about the Government of India Act 1919. It was passed to expand participation of Indians in the government of India. The Indian leaders had supported the British in the First World War, hoping that their demands would be met after the war was over. To pacify the demands of the Congress, the British passed the Government of India Act in 1919. It was also known as the Montagu-Chelmsford Reforms, as the Act was formulated by the Secretary of State for India, Lord Montagu, and the Indian Viceroy Lord Chelmsford. The Act introduced a number of changes in the central and provincial legislatures. Now let's talk about all those changes that had been brought by them. The central legislature was replaced by two houses. First was the Imperial Legislative Assembly and the second was the Council of States. The Act introduced dual government or duchy in the provincial administration. The subjects under the jurisdiction of the provinces were divided into two lists, that is, reserved and second list is transferred. Under dual government, important departments such as finance and police remained under the control of governor, while public departments such as education and public health were given to the ministers responsible to legislature. The provincial legislature councils were enlarged. The majority of their members were to be elected. More powers were given to the provincial government. Provincial government talks about state government. So likewise, because of Government of Indian Act, provincial government started establishing with two different subject lists. First was reserved and second was transferred. Now let's talk about the Rolect Act 1919. The Government of Indian Act failed to satisfy the demands of Indians. Large-scale protest meetings were held all over the country. Alarmed, the British government passed the Rolect Act in 1919, which authorized the British government to imprison any person without any trial. The act was widely criticized as it aimed at the suppression of freedom fighters who were hunted down, imprisoned, or hanged. The Jallianwala Bagh Massacre. Hartals and protest meetings were held all over the country opposing the Rolect Act. On April 6, 1919, Gandhiji was arrested, followed by arrests of Dr. Satyapal and Dr. Saifuddin in Punjab. On April 13, 1919, on Baisakhi, a peaceful public meeting was held at Jallianwala Bagh in Amritsar to protest against the arrest of Dr. Satyapal and Dr. Saifuddin. A group of British soldiers led by General Dyer blocked the only exit of the park and opened fire without any warning on the helpless men, women and children gathered there. Thousands perished and many more were injured. The Jallianwala Bagh incident created a nationwide distress towards the British. General Dyer defended his action by terming it necessary to teach a moral lesson to the Punjab. So this was the Great Jallianwala Bagh Massacre 1919. Now let's talk about Khilafat movement 1920. The Khilafat issue was one such cause. In 1920, the British imposed a harsh treaty on the Turkish Sultan or Khalifa. People were furious about this as they had been about Jallianwala Bagh massacre. Also, Indian Muslims were keen that the Khalifa be allowed to retain control over Muslim sacred places in the Ottoman Empire. The leaders of the Khilafat agitation, Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali, now wished to initiate a full-fledged non-cooperation movement. Gandhiji supported their call and urged the Congress to campaign against Punjab wrong, that is Jallianwala Bagh, and the Khilafat wrong and demand Swaraj. Likewise, Khilafat movement and non-cooperation movement was started together in 1st August 1920. The main ideology behind starting of non-cooperation movement was not to cooperate with any of the British policies. Because of the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, Mahatma Gandhiji was very angry upon Britisher. So to stop Britisher, Mahatma Gandhiji started non-cooperation movement by saying that now they will not cooperate with any of the policies of the Britisher. This is how non-cooperation movement started. The non-cooperation movement gained momentum through 1921 to 1922. Thousands of students left government controlled schools and colleges. Many lawyers, such as Motilal Nehru, C.R. Das, and many others, gave up their law practices and joined a non-cooperation movement. Surrendering of all the titles, in this Gandhiji returned his medal while Rabindranath Tagore and G. Subramaniam Iyer had already returned their titles or medals back to Britisher. Boycott of British goods. Liquor shops were picketed at different parts of the country. Indian people lit public bonfires of British clothes. Because of this, the import of foreign clothes fell drastically between 1920 and 1922. Likewise, all the activities was being carried out through non-cooperation movement. This movement also saw the participation of large-scale people. Thus, this non-cooperation movement was successful. But later on what happened? The person who had started this non-cooperation movement, that same person is ending non-cooperation movement because of Chauri Chaura incident. Chauri Chaura incident 1922. A violent incident at Chauri Chaura on February 5, 1922 forced Gandhiji to call off the non-cooperation movement. The police at Chauri Chaura fired at a group of demonstrators. The demonstrators retaliated by burning down the police stations, causing the death of 22 English policemen. Gandhiji had wanted the movement to be non-violent, so it was called off in the wake of this violence. On March 10, 1922, Gandhiji was arrested and sentenced to 6 years imprisonment. Now let's talk about the Swaraj Party. Congress leaders were disappointed by Gandhiji's decision to withdraw the non-cooperation movement. In January 1923, Chittaranjan Das and Motilal Nehru formed the Swaraj Party, along with prominent leaders such as Hussain Sahib of Bengal, Vittal Bhai Patel and other Congress leaders who were dissatisfied with the Congress. In December 1922, Chittaranjan Das, Khelkar and Motilal Nehru formed the Congress Khilafat Swaraj Party, along with other Congress leaders who were becoming dissatisfied with the Congress. The No Changers was the other group who accepted Gandhiji's decision to withdraw the movement. Both the Swarajists and the Non-Changers were engaged in a political struggle, but both were determined to avoid a repetition of the 1907 split at Surat. Gandhiji advised the two groups to remain in the Congress but to work in separate ways. Chittaranjan Das died in 1925 and Motilal Nehru returned to the Congress party, and Swaraj Party was greatly weakened. The constructive program. After his release from prison in 1924, Gandhiji was involved in the constructive program adopted by some other Congress leaders like Rajendra Prasad, Vallabhbhai Patel and C. Rajagopalachari. Gandhiji, along with his political activities, also initiated schemes which would bring about social welfare and benefit to the millions of poor people. Gandhiji's constructive program included sustainable development, formation of local self-government, development of cottage industries, popularization of khadi and universal primary education. Gandhiji made it compulsory for all members of the Congress committee to spin 2000 yards of yarn every month. He believed that spinning khadi would make the poor self-reliant and give them self-respect. And All India Spinners Association was set up and khadi bandhas were set up in different parts of the country. He campaigned against the practice of untouchability and referred to all untouchables as Harijans, meaning children of God. The Simon Commission, 1927. The Simon Commission was a group of 7 British members of Parliament led by Sir John Simon, who came to India in 1927 to study the working of the Government of Indian Act 1919. The commission did not include a single Indian member. The Indian National Congress, at its December 1927 session in Chennai, resolved to boycott the commission. A faction of the Muslim League led by Muhammad Ali Jinnah also decided to boycott the commission. When the commission arrived in India on February 3, 1928, there was a nationwide strike. Protesters greeted the Simon Commission with black flags and with the slogan that is Simon go back, Simon go back. In Punjab, police lathi charged an anti-Simon Commission procession led by Lala Lajpat Rai. Lala Lajpat Rai had got a fatal injury in that procession and he passed away. The commission published its report in 1930. The Nehru Report. The attempt at drafting a constitution by the Indians was done in 1928 by Motilal Nehru and Tej Bahadur Sapru. Nehru Report demanded a dominion status for Indian, but the Muslim League rejected the report. Thus, the demand for complete independence became more pronounced. Re-emergence of revolutionary activities. The suspension of non-cooperation movement caused frustration among people and led to the revival of revolutionary activities. New revolutionary organizations were set up which advocated radical protest methods like murder of British officials and establishment of factories to produce bombs on the large scale. A conference was held at Kanpur in 1924 which was attended by revolutionaries from all over the country. Ram Prasad Bismil, Jagesh Chatterjee and Sachindra Sanyal founded the Hindustan Republican Association. Its aim was to organize armed resistance against foreign rule and to set up a republic based on adult franchise. The party needed money to carry on its activities, so it resorted to various means. On August 9, 1925, a train to Lucknow carrying government treasury was looted at Kakuri. This was the famous Kakuri conspiracy case. Ram Prasad Bismil, Roshan Singh, Ashfaqullah Khan and Rajendra Lahiri were sentenced to death and others to long terms of imprisonment. Chandrasekhar Azad, who belonged to the Hindustan Republican Association, escaped arrest. He later shot himself dead in Allahabad during an encounter with the British police. In December 1928, a police officer named Saunders was assassinated. He was believed to be responsible for the death of Lala Lajpat Rai, who had died of wounds received during a procession against the Simon Commission. On April 8, 1929, Bhagat Singh and Batukeshwar Dutt threw a bomb in the Central Legislature Assembly and raised slogans of Inqilab Zindabad. Bhagat Singh, Sukhdev and Rajguru were tried and later hanged. The whole nation mourned their loss. Jitin Das, another revolutionary, went on a fast unto death to protest against the ill treatment out to the prisoners. He died after 63 days of hunger strike. His heroism and bravery inspired many others. The most daring of revolutionary activities in India was the attack on the armory at Chittagong by Surya Sen on April 18, 1930. Surya Sen was arrested in 1933 and sentenced to death. The government ruthlessly suppressed these activities. Gradually, with the death of prominent leaders, the revolutionary movement lost its force. Now, let's talk about Lahore session of the Congress 1929. In December 1929, the Congress session was held at Lahore with Jawaharlal Nehru as the president. The Congress declared the attainment of complete independence or Purna Swaraj as its aim. It decided to launch a civil disobedience movement under the leadership of Gandhiji. January 26, 1930 was celebrated as Independence Day. Meetings were held all over India and the Congress tricolor flag was hoisted. Civil Disobedience Movement. This movement was started by Mahatma Gandhiji to oppose the power of the Britisher. The main ideology of the civil disobedience movement was to break the Britishers' laws that were made by them upon the Indians. The British government had a monopoly on salt production and had imposed a tax on salt. On March 12, 1930, Mahatma Gandhiji, along with 78 volunteers, began his famous Dandi March. From Sabarmati Ashram to the coastal town of Dandi, Gandhiji and his followers covered a distance of 375 kilometers in 24 days. He reached Dandi on April 6 and violated the law by making salt. This was the beginning of the civil disobedience movement. Soon it became a mass movement. Thousands of people started breaking the salt law. Foreign cloth was boycotted and liquor shops were picketed. Farmers refused to pay taxes and likewise civil disobedience movement gained momentum. In the northwestern part of the country, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, popularly known as Frontier Gandhi, formed a popular non-violent movement which was known as Khuday Khidmat Kar movement. He was totally against the partition of India. The British government used repressive measures to crush the movement. Satyagrahis were imprisoned in large numbers. The Congress was declared illegal and major Congress leaders were put behind bars. The Gandhi-Irvine Pact, 1931. In such a volatile situation, the British decided to negotiate with Gandhiji. In 1931, a political agreement was signed between Mahatma Gandhi and the Viceroy of India, Lord Irwin. The Gandhi-Irvine Pact spelled out certain specific action points to be initiated by the colonial government of India as well as the Indian National Congress. This included participation by the Indian National Congress in the Round Table Conference, release of prisoners arrested for participating in the civil disobedience movement. All these were the points that was mentioned in this Gandhi-Irvine Pact. The Karachi Session of Congress 1931. In 1931, the Congress session was held at Karachi. The following decisions were taken on this occasion. The Gandhi-Irvine Pact was approved. A resolution on fundamental rights and economical policies was passed. A plan for the reconstruction of Indian society after independence was outlined. Now let's talk about the Pune Pact 1932. The Pune Pact was an agreement between Mahatma Gandhiji and Dr. B.R. Ambedkar on behalf of depressed classes and upper caste Hindu leaders on the reservation of electoral seats for the depressed classes in the legislature of British India. Next is the Government of India Act 1935. The British passed The Government of Indian Act in 1935, which had the following features. The Act suggested the creation of an All India Federation of British Indian provinces and Indian state. The central legislature was to be bicameral, the two houses being the Council of States and Federal Assembly. The governor also enjoyed special powers such as full control over the civil service and the police. He could also veto the bills passed by the legislature. The Congress rejected the act in its 1936 Lucknow session. However, it agreed to participate in the elections to the Provincial Assembly to be held in 1937. In the election held in 1937, the Congress secured a majority and formed governments in 7 of the 11 provinces of British India. The Muslim League also won a few seats in the Muslim electorate. Two-nation theory. Now let's talk about it. The Muslim League, formed in 1906, was the most prominent communal party. In 1939, when the Congress leaders resigned from the provincial legislatures, the Muslim League celebrated the day as Day of Deliverance from Hindu domination. In 1940, at Lahore session of Muslim League, the Pakistan resolution was passed which adopted Muhammad Ali Jinnah's two-nation theory. The Congress rejected the resolution. Jinnah demanded a separate state for the Muslim called Pakistan, as he believed that Muslims would not get adequate representation in government. Aimed to weaken the national movement, the British supported this demand of Muslim League. The Cripps Mission Plan 1942. In March 1942, Sir Stafford Cripps came to India to seek the support of Indian leaders in the Second World War. This is known as the Cripps Mission. The mission proposed dominion status for India after the war was over. It gave the provinces and princely states the choice of joining the Indian Union and remaining independent. The proposal was rejected by both the Muslim League and the Congress leaders. Thus, the mission was a failure. The Quit India Movement 1942. After the Cripps mission failed, the Congress decided to launch the third mass movement against the Britisher. In August 1942, Gandhiji gave the slogan Quit India. The All Indian Congress Committee met on August 8, 1942 at Mumbai and passed the Quit India resolution, which proposed the starting of non-violent mass struggle under Gandhiji. The resolution demanded the immediate end of the British rule in India. Gandhiji gave the mantra, do or die. The repression by British continued. On August 9, 1942, Gandhiji and other Congress leaders were arrested and the Congress were declared illegal. People reacted violently to this and attacked the vital institutions of British authority such as police stations, post offices and railway stations. Telegraph and telephone wires were cut and government buildings were burned. The British government went all out to crush the movement. Thousands of people were imprisoned and killed. Protesters were lathi charged. Most leaders of the Congress were imprisoned. In the end, the government succeeded in crushing the movement ruthlessly. The Quit India movement was the last major mass movement in the history of Indian freedom struggle. Now, let's talk about Subhash Chandra Bose and the INA, that is Indian National Army. In Hindi, we call it as Azad Hind Fauj. Subhash Chandra Bose was one of the dynamic leaders of the Indian freedom struggle. Left the Congress due to ideological differences between Gandhiji and him. In 1939, Subhash Chandra Bose formed the All India Forward Bloc to carry out its activity for the independence of the country. The Indian National Army or Azad Hind Fauj was formed in Southeast Asia in 1942. The INA advanced towards India via Burma. In May 1944, the army conquered Impal and Kohima. Bose gave the slogan Delhi Chalo, that is, March to Delhi. However, with the defeat of Japan in the Second World War, the INA had to abandon all its plan. Casualties and defeats hit the INA. It is believed that Netaji was killed in a plane crash while flying to Tokyo in 1945. Now, let's talk about the Cabinet Mission Plan 1946. The plan proposed greater autonomy to the provinces and the princely states. Only defense and foreign affairs were kept under central control. The provinces were granted the right to form a union among themselves. The plan also proposed formation of an interim government at the center to carry on administrations until the constitution was implemented. An assembly consisting of 389 members was to be formed to draft the Constitution of India. In September 1946, an interim government was formed with Jawaharlal Nehru as the vice president. The Muslim League also joined it after some time. But the League continued with its demand for the separate state of Pakistan under the two-nation theory. A Constituent Assembly was elected in July 1946, in which the Congress won the seats in the Parliament and made Dr. Rajendra Prasad as the first President of the Assembly, which started functioning from December 9, 1946. The Mountbatten Plan 1947. On March 24, 1947, Lord Mountbatten was appointed the Viceroy of India. He presented a plan for the division of India into two independent states, that is, the Indian Union and Pakistan. Indian states were given the right to decide their own future. Pakistan consisted of West Punjab, East Bengal, Sindh and North-West Frontier Province. Likewise, the division was carried out. Now let's talk about the final topic of this chapter, that is Indian Independence Act of 1947. The provisions of the Mountbatten Plan were introduced in the British Parliament, which was passed as the Indian Independence Act. The violent communal rights and the continuous pressure by the Muslim League for Pakistan ultimately made the partition of India unavoidable. India became an independent country on August 15, 1947. The members took a pledge to devote themselves to the service of India and her progress. The Indian tricolor was hoisted on the historic Red Fort and a new chapter began in the history of India. On January 30, 1948, Gandhiji was shot dead by a Hindu extremist, Nathuram Godse. The whole country was left in a state of shock. Likewise, we have finished with this chapter. Thank you.